And now I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the fragile vegetation signs and what the terrain has to do with that. Well, if you get back far enough on the Appalachian Trail in certain places, they'll have stay on the trail, be careful, don't get too far off the trail because this is a fragile environment. The plants, we want to keep them, we want to encourage them to grow, so please be very careful. Now, this might have been not more than a half-mile away. You were climbing straight up a mountain. The path has been there for years and years. Well, guess what happens when it rains? Each time it rains, it erodes. So that path could be rock strewn in a trench. So you're traveling up a trench with rocks that's severely eroded because the trail is designed that way. And then you get up a little bit higher and you flatten out, and it has these signs to be very careful with the fragile plants. Duh! Let's not make a path straight up the mountain if you want to be careful about the plants and the environment. I thought that was really silly. Hey. Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about the AT signs and blazes. Blazes being part, of the blazes. Of the signs. Now, on the AT, there are a lot of signs. There are not only a lot of signs for the Appalachian Trail, but the Appalachian Trail is marked with white blazes. That means there's a white mark on the trees. Somebody paints a white mark. So all the way from Georgia to Maine, you look for these white marks to make sure you're on the right trail. Now, the further you get on the trail, away from civilization, the further you get away, the less paint or the less signage. In fact, certain states have an immunity of some sort to painting trees and blazes in distant places. So you're kind of guessing where the trail is or if you're on the right trail. It makes it really interesting. Okay? Now, sometimes if you're in like a national park, Shenandoah National Park, the trails, there's many trails that might cross the Appalachian Trail. So you might get to a particular point and have 3 different trails. Now, if they're not real well marked, like they aren't sometimes, and I did, when I continued through the trails, what I thought was the AT, I followed the trail. That seemed to be the best trail of the trails there and the most used. So I traveled on that. I went at least a mile. And then it forked, and I took the left fork up the mountain. It dead-ended, came back, went down along the stream. And I thought, this is not right, because the trail was just dying out. And so I hiked back up the mile, and I stood there where these 3 trails crossed, and I thought, I never did see the white blazes on the trail I took, and I don't see any right here. So I looked around a little bit. It was a little kind of an open area, and I'm looking around, and I looked down over the side of the mountain, over to my right, and in between the trees, I could hardly make out a trail, or if it's a trail. So I looked down, and down about 200 feet, I just barely see a white blaze. So, of the 3 trails that crossed there, the Appalachian Trail turned right, directly right from the direction I was headed, and headed down the mountain. Okay? Not well marked. And then there's the times when you have a really old wooden sign. It is eroded. It's been there probably for 50 or 60 years. Now, it says something, and it has to do with directions or what you're going to, but you cannot read it. There's no way you can read that sign. I want to tell you a funny story. I was up in New Hampshire in the White Mountains, and I had a lot of miles under my belt by then, and I felt pretty good about myself. My ego was there I'm a through hiker, and I got up to Lake of the Clouds Hut, which is above tree line, and it's about a mile high. But Mount Washington is directly above that, and that's another 1,500 feet above that. So I had to go up and over the ridge and down to Pingham Notch, which is about 6 or 7 miles or more. And so I asked the person at the hut, the people that work there, I said, "Oh, I'm a through hiker. What's the fastest way to get down to Pingham Notch?" And she told me, she said, "Let's take this trail and go by Tuckerman's Ravine and go this way." And I said, "Well, how long does it take you to take this trail?" She said, "Oh, about an hour and a half." So I started out on this trail thinking that since I wanted to go to a place that was 4,000 feet below me, that I would be heading downhill. Now, I'm climbing up these huge boulders. I climb up another 1,000 feet. I'm in a cloud. And I'm thinking, this can't be the right way. But I stayed on that trail, went up and over the ridge. The clouds were breaking, and I could peer down into Tuckerman's Ravine. I thought, I know, that's the way I want to go. And distances are extremely deceiving at that altitude. And I took what's called the crossover trail. Oh, that looks good. But the crossover trail was going over boulders the size of a large car. So I was scrambling over all these huge boulders. And then part of the trail was the Lineheads Trail, which connected. And I had never taken that before. And the Lineheads Trail was a trail almost straight down. And I was climbing down without ropes or climbing equipment, which I should have had to go down there. It blew my mind. And I finally got down to where I would say it's a normal trail, and that took me at least another hour from that point. So to make a long story short, to get from Lake of the Glass Hut to Pingham Notch, it took me at least 3 hours, and I was humping to get down there. So that's a story that reminds me of a movie, and it's called A Mad, Mad World. And then it's a mad, mad world. All the characters are in a chase to get to the treasure. They want to get to it first. So it's a race across the West. And Phil Silvers is one of the people in the movie, and he's in a large sedan, and he's in a race, and he's in a hurry, and he stops, and he sees this little kid. He picks him up, and he says, "Little kid, do you know how to get to such and such?" And the kid goes, "Yeah." He doesn't talk. The little kid doesn't talk. He just nods his head and points. So after many miles, the kid points off the road into a dirt, gravelly road. And they start following that for miles and miles. And then they get to a stream, or a river, I should say. And Phil Silver says, "Should I go that way across the stream?" And the kid goes, "Yeah." And the kid wades out into the river and shows Phil Silvers that it's okay. And Phil Silvers, of course, drives towards the kid. And about 15 feet shy of the kid, the car starts to sink and start down the river. And the kid, like that, and Phil Silvers said, "Oh, that just kid." So that's kind of how I felt with the person that was giving me directions at the hut. Now, I want to explain about navigation on the trail. You have to be a good navigator to navigate the Appalachian Trail. It ain't going to do it all for you. So if you don't have that God-given sense of direction, then like some of the hikers, not too many, that if you're trying to get to Pennsylvania on the Appalachian Trail, I wouldn't be surprised if they're in Kansas. In fact, some have nicknames that allude to them getting lost. Now, there are maps to keep the AT hikers on the trail, and they're important. We're looking at our maps quite frequently, our guides, to know when we expect to be at a certain place, because that's important and very important. You don't want to be hiking too many miles. You don't want to hike past something that's important to you, like a gap in the mountain where there's a road that takes you to get food. And if that's mismarked on your map or guide, that makes it really difficult and frustrating. And you're guessing where that should be.